Good morning. Thanks very much for coming. I'm afraid I don't speak Romanian. I'm going to have to speak in English. All significant human achievement, everything important that humanity has ever done, all significant human achievement is the result of group process, group effort. It takes groups to make things happen. The notion that, it's even true in science, the notion that scientists are individuals who work alone in laboratories is nonsense. All scientists build on the work of preceding scientists. So one more time, all significant human achievement is the result of group effort. Some groups are more effective than other groups. BMW is more effective than Fiat. And the reason some football teams are consistently better than other football teams, some banks consistently outperform other banks. The reason some groups are more effective than others is leadership. It's leadership that makes the difference. Leadership is all about high-performing groups. The most important so I think leadership is the most important single problem in human affairs. As a political scientist friend of mine used to say, the fundamental question in human affairs is who shall rule? And I think the fundamental question is who should rule? So on the one hand, leadership is the most important problem in human affairs. On the other hand, the academic study of leadership has failed. Let me, time out. As you say, I meant to say, I'm not a businessman, I'm not a sales guy. My background is physics and engineering. I'm all about analyzing processes to understand how things work and then how to make them work. That's what engineers do. They take things apart to try to make them work better. I've been really, it seems to me that running organizations is a more important problem than designing circuit boards. That side drifted into psychology, but my background is analysis, research, data, and so forth. So the academic study of leadership has failed. And my old joke is, if you ask an important question, and academic psychologists have nothing to say about it. So they certainly dropped the ball on leadership. The academic study of leadership has failed for two reasons. First, the way they define leadership. Academic researchers define leadership in terms of who's at the top. So if you're at the top, you're by definition a leader. So Donald Trump is the leader of the free world, right? Who gets to the top of large, hierarchical, bureaucratic, male-dominated organizations? Politicians, who may or may not have talent for leadership. If you define leadership in terms of who's at the top, what you're going to get is a bunch of politicians. So what's the right way to define leadership? In terms of group performance. Leadership is about building and maintaining a high-performing team. Leadership's about getting a group together to outperform other groups. In the history of the world, it made a real difference. I mean, in the history of human civilization is the history of warfare. And this is perfectly biological. Groups that have better leadership were able to sustain themselves in the face of invasions. So leadership should be defined in terms of the ability to build, maintain a high-performing unit, and it should be evaluated in terms of the performance of the unit, and not in terms of, anyway. So I disagree. So not people at the top may or may not be leaders, but people who can run effective groups are always leaders. The second reason academic study of leadership has failed is they ignore the problem of bad leadership. They just completely ignore it. I've always been interested in leadership, but I didn't have enough time until about 2002 to actually drill down and study the subject. So when I did that, and to get into a new field, it takes some time. I mean, you have to just quit, and it's like going back to school. You have to just dedicate yourself to studying the literature. And what I discovered in 2002 was, first of all, there was absolutely no consensus among the academics regarding the characteristics of effective leadership. They had no consensus at all. And I said, okay, taking a page from Piaget and Freud, who said, if you want to understand how things work, study the mistakes. It's all the parapraxis of everyday life. I said, if there's no consensus about good ones, what about the bad ones? And the first question is, how many bad ones are there? And I did some data snooping and some number crunching and fiddling around, and I concluded, based on inferentially, that The base rate of incompetent management in corporate America, public and private sector, the base rate, the frequency of incompetent management was somewhere between 65 and 75%. And I went to a conference that year. It's 2002. It's called Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology. So I was in this room that was probably 3 times the size of this room. It was packed. It was probably 400 people there, all management consultants in their suits, the suits, the blue suits, ties. There they all were. And I said, the room was packed. There was people standing around the walls. I said, what would you guess the base rate of incompetent management in corporate America might be? Person over here said 2%. I'm serious now. Person over here said 4%. Person over here said 6%. And I said, what would you say if I told you the base rate of incompetent management is 65 to 75%? And there was this pause, and then the room just erupted. They went, ah, ah, like this. I could feel the wind from the audience. Ah. And I thought it was pretty funny. And I said, you are a bunch of whores. Because they tell companies what they want to hear, not what they need to hear. We believe there's no news and good news. The only way you can get better is to acknowledge your mistakes. And if all you do is tell these companies that their managers are all great, no one's ever going to get any better. So consider the following. 65 to 75% of the workforce in the United States say the worst, the most awful, the most stressful part of their life. The most stressful part of their lives, their whole lives, is their immediate boss. 65 to 75% of people. 65% of the workers in the United States, 65% of the workers in the United States say they would take a pay cut if someone would fire their boss. 20% of the Baltimore, Maryland, next to Washington, D.C., 20% of the Baltimore workforce say they actively fantasize every day about murdering their boss. The principal cause of disease is stress. What makes you sick is already there. What varies is the strength of your immune system. When you're stressed, your immune system shuts down. The principal cause of disease is stress. The principal cause of stress in everyday life in America is bad management. Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta say that bad management is a public health hazard. It's making people sick. So why are there so many bad managers loose in the United States? Management in Romania is going to be perfect. Almost perfect. Almost perfect. Why are there so many bad managers? It has to do with the way managers are chosen, the way they're selected. And this brings us to the topic of charisma. So what do I want to do? I want to talk about charisma and leadership. I want to talk about humility and leadership. And then I want to suggest that charismatic leaders can be and often are destructive. I want to argue that humble leaders can be and often are effective. And I want to make a distinction, a really important distinction. Probably if you remember nothing else about this talk, remember the distinction between emergence and effectiveness. Emergence is standing out and being noticed. Effectiveness is building a high-performing team. And then I'm going to suggest that charisma is to emergence as humility is to effectiveness. Okay? You with me? Okay. Poink. So here are the definitions. I think charisma, I know where it comes from. It's the concept of animal magnetism. It sort of first emerged, I think, in Western Europe, in Paris in the early 1800s. It was a guy named Anton Mesmer. The term mesmerize. He was a hypnotist. He was a physician. He was a medical man. He was a juju man. You came to him with your illness. My head aches. My back hurts. My toes itch, and then he would hypnotize you, like, ooh, and then your symptoms would be cured. Well, sometimes he'd put, it doesn't matter. Anyway, the notion was that he had such a powerful personality that just being in his presence could make you whole again, could cure your afflictions. So that's the basis of the notion of charisma. It's a compelling attractiveness, stage presence, compelling attractiveness, and when you're just in the presence of these people, you feel awed and ready to just submit and do what they want. It's animal magnetism. It's hypnotism, and they take themselves. Just one last thing: charismatic people take themselves very seriously, because they're very proud of themselves and they're kind of self. On the other hand, humility is just the opposite. It's being free from pride or arrogance, not taking yourself seriously. I should note here that the 8 great world religions, Confucianism, Taoism, Islam, all the great world religions advocate, promote humility as a proper state of mind. I think that's the wisdom of the ages, right? So, we can measure, assess charisma, and we can measure or assess narcissism. We find that charisma and narcissism are fairly substantially correlated in leadership samples. In leadership samples, if they're charismatic, they're narcissistic. If they're narcissistic, they're charismatic. And now the correlation is about 0.6, which is significantly higher than the correlation between your height and your weight. So it's a very substantial, robust correlation. Charismatic narcissists won't accept responsibility for failure. If something goes wrong, it was your fault, not theirs. They take more credit for success than is fair, that if it goes well, it was because of them, not because of you. They'll steal your ideas, and they'll take credit for them. And you see this all the time. They won't listen to feedback. They will not take feedback, and as a result, they can't learn from experience. So they keep making the same mistakes over and over again because they won't listen to feedback. They feel entitled to leadership positions. I'm here, I'm great, you should salute me. You know, I'm here to lead you. And the data, this is only, and people have only started talking about this in the last 10 years. The data show, there are data now. Narcissistic CEOs ruin companies. They make wild, exaggerated bets. The bets fail. They can't learn from experience, so they double down on their bad bets, and boom, and you're done. Okay, so where does all this come from? Where does this fascination with charisma come from? It has a very clear, from my point of view, it has a very clear origin. Historically in the United States, CEOs of publicly traded companies were like greeters at a country club. Their only job as the CEO was to get along with the board, to go play golf with the board and go drinking with the board and so forth. And so it was a cushy job. And in, say, the 1950s, the difference between a CEO's pay and the pay of the average employee was only about 3 or 4 times. Whereas today, the difference between CEOs is something like 350 or 400 times. You know, they make 350 to 400 times as much money as the staff. Okay, but back in the 60s, that wasn't true. So what happened was, in the 1970s, there were 2 guys. An activist investors was a guy named T. Boone Pickens who was in the oil business. He lives out where we are. Really smart guy. He died 2 weeks ago. He was vested in ConocoPhillips, and he said, "I've invested in your stock. He was a really smart guy. He said, "I'm invested in your stock. I'm not getting a proper return on my stock. You need to do something about it. And the problem is, your CEO." He knew about bad leadership even then. Well, you know, everyone's always known this. Said, "I'm not getting the proper return on my stock," and so did the other activist investors. Not getting proper return. You need to get a CEO who can give us the money, the returns, the profits that we deserve. So this led. There was a famous paper in the Harvard Business Review in the mid-1970s arguing for something called agency theory. And the notion was to tie the CEO's compensation to the performance of the stock. If the stock did well, the CEO made more money. If the stock did poorly, shoot the CEO, basically. So that then led to a search for CEO. Well, so what do narcissists say? Okay, so it's an employment interview. You're the board, and you got 3 CEO candidates, and one of them says, "I'm a database guy. My numbers show me certain ways that we can improve this company," and then the second guy says, "I know your mother-in-law," or blah, blah, blah. And the third guy says, "I'm your man. I can take this company to the next level. I can give you the profits that you deserve, that are yours and you're being deprived of. I can make this company great again. I can make America great again." So, now, that's the way narcissists talk. Those are actually items on our narcissism scale. You know, I can transform organizations. I'm Superman. So, who are you going to hire? If you're a bunch of greedy guys and you want money, you're going to hire the guy who says he's going to give you the returns you deserve, right? So, boom, there you are. I mean, there's this direct correlation between narcissism and promising great financial results. See, companies began hiring CEOs who guarantee better results. Narcissists always promise you better because they're great. They're just fabulous people. So organizations think they need charismatic leadership, but charisma often brings narcissism. But you got it, right? You see where this all comes from. It's just driven by profit motive and greed. Okay. Charisma invades the culture of business. There's a job site, internet job site called Indeed.com. It lists 225,000 jobs that require charisma, and it lists 3,300 jobs that require humility. What do companies think they need? What are they looking for? They're looking for charisma, right? So there it is. I mean, it's like a poison in the bloodstream. Okay, now, charisma has consequences. Empirically, charisma has consequences. Here you go. Here. These are the consequences of charisma. Two guys who rose to the top of their country's political hierarchies based on their charisma. I mean, I'm the man on the white horse. I'll take you. Both were working for themselves and not their countries, although, if the country does better, everybody does a little bit better. And the guy on the right has definitely made rich people richer in America. The guy on the left made a lot of people richer in France. Both enjoyed limited support, but their support was rock solid. The people who support them really support them, okay? So, and they both created mixed legacies. My point is, charisma has consequences. It will get you to the top and will deliver some kind of short-term results, and it will create a following. Now, but humility has consequences. These are two of my favorite guys. The guy on the left is Horatio Nelson. He was the hero of the Battle of Trafalgar, he sunk Napoleon's fleet and made it impossible for France ever to invade England. He died in that fight because he led from the front. He was up on deck. The French were out to assassinate him. His troops said, "Get below because they know who you are." He said, "No, I'm in charge here." They shot him. The guy on the right is Ulysses S. Grant. He was a two-time president of the United States, but before that, he was the general in charge of the northern forces during the American Civil War. He's regarded as one of the four greatest generals of all time. He's one of two great generals who've written a biography. The other one's name was Caesar. His biography is really good, by the way. Neither of these guys ever lost a fight. And they were fighting all the time. They never, ever lost a fight. They were both quite humble, and their troops really, really loved them. In the case of Grant, I just love this story. In the last 2 years of the war, Grant was so well liked, so well respected by his troops. He always led from the front, so he was out in front, and he was apparently the best horseman in the whole army. He could ride his horse. And he was out in front, just out of the range of the Confederate infantry. And when he would ride across in front of his troops, the enemy troops would begin to cheer. Think about that. That's called great leader. They were both quite humble. They were both well admired by their subordinates. They're two of the greatest military leaders in history, and they changed the course of the world. I mean, they really did. So they left an absolutely unmixed legacy. Their legacy is honor. Okay. At the world of business, I just love this. The guy on the left is Jack Welch. He was the transforming CEO of General Electric. He did through some just basically financial engineering. He transformed GE stock. Every CEO since him has been unwinding the mess that he created. They called his staff Neutron Jack. Neutron Jack because wherever he stepped, no grass would ever grow again. And he said, all management is about self-confidence. It's showing them that how confident and assertive you are. I'm in charge here. I can do this. Okay. I actually ran into him once on the island where we live. He's an arrogant little shit. He's just Anyway, the guy on the right, you've never heard of him. His name is Darwin Smith. He was the CEO of Kimberly-Clark. When he took over at Kimberly-Clark, it was a lumber company, and he turned it into a paper products company. So he's the guy who brought you Kleenex and really great toilet paper. and other products. During the 10 years that he was the CEO of Kimberly-Clark, it was the best performing stock on the New York Stock Exchange. He substantially outperformed U.S. Steel. He substantially outperformed General Motors. He substantially outperformed GE, Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola. He was the best CEO in America. And his line was, every day when I came to work, I thought I had to earn my job again. I never stopped trying to be qualified for my job. Every day when I came to work, I had to earn my job. Is that a great attitude? That's from the CEO. Not, I'm entitled to this. You need to bow down to me because I'm grand. But every day I have to earn my job. So there you go. So Welch didn't get fired. He went away. But then they hired a guy named Immelt. So this is Immelt who got fired. And then Flannery who then got fired. And then the last guy is named Larry Culp, and he just took over. Culp was the CEO of a company called Danaher. It was enormously successful. Culp is one of the good ones, modest, humble, understated, intense. These are the number of times, how long their shareholders' letters are. You can see the narcissistic bloviator who just runs on and on and on and on. He sounds like that in interviews too. And the next guy, and then Culp has, it isn't about him, it's about the business, and he doesn't have a lot to talk about. I think this is kind of a interesting documentation. So, who are the high-profile people in an organization? You go into any organization, people can tell you who their hypos are, who their the rising people. I used to work at an organization. Every month we got together to talk about who is the star of tomorrow, and we'd spend some time. It was a perfectly idiotic exercise. Sit around in a room and talk about who the stars. Can we identify the stars of tomorrow? Which shifted? Who's in, who's out, who's up, who's down? Stars of tomorrow. So who are the high-profile people? Everybody knows. What's the relationship between being high profile in an organization and being a good leader? That brings up the distinction between emergence and effectiveness, and that brings up Fred Luthen's book. This book is one of the 3 or 4 most important pieces of leadership research ever done, and it's unfortunately not so well known anymore. He studied 457 managers for a period of 4 years. He gathered detailed information on these guys. He had assessment center data, psychometric data, he had observer ratings, he had staff ratings, he had bio data, he had, and he even had a researcher follow them around during the course of the day and write down what they were doing at different points. He had an enormous amount of data on these guys. After 4 years, he then gathered performance data. He said, okay, we've got all this, we've got data on 457 guys. Now, how do we predict high performance? So he gathered performance data, and what he found was that the performance data fell into 2 groups, or there were 2 groups of considered high performers. The first group were people who got rapid pay raises and quick and rapid promotions and high profile assignments. So they were the stars of tomorrow. The second group were managers whose business unit was performing at a high level. First group, rapid performance, stars of tomorrow. Second group, running our organizations that are performing at a very high. Okay, and there was only a 10% overlap between these 2 groups, a correlation of about 0.3. So, but the interesting thing is, how did they spend their time? Because remember, they had data on how they actually spent their time during the day. Those who were advancing rapidly spent their time networking. They were professional networkers. They spent their time doing politics. Who's over there? How's it going over there? Can I go to the next meeting? What happened at that meeting? Blah, blah, blah. Can I buy you a drink after work? The second group spent their time working on their teams, okay? So you got people who are getting promoted and recognition, and the second group who are actually making money for the company. As making money for yourself, making money for the company. You with me? You understand the difference between those 2 groups? Okay. This is another one of the 3 or 4 really, really important pieces of leadership research. It's an entirely different topic. This is a guy at Stanford Business School who studied the Fortune 1000 companies looking for organizations, companies, publicly traded companies that spent 15 years performing below the standard for their industry. Then there was a change, and then there was 15 years of sustained performance, significantly better than the standard of the industry. You got it? So 15 years of mediocre performance, then 15 years of superior, not good, superior performance. And he found 11 companies that fit that profile. And he's not a personality guy, he's not a psychologist. He said that the data just jumped out that he said he didn't believe his own results and he didn't want to believe his results. He said the difference between those 11 really high performing companies and all the others was the CEO. And then he went and interviewed those CEOs, and he said the most interesting thing about them, these are guys who are running really successful organizations, said they were all quite humble, but they were intensely competitive and really hard, just like the Kimberly-Clark guy, who was in fact part of that sample. And so when I read this the first time, I went, wow, that's it. This is the study that tells you, if you pay attention, say goodbye to the myth of charismatic leadership. The good ones are all humble. They're always humble. They're never charismatic. Well, that's not entirely true. I love this one. This was a little report that came out. It was in the Wall Street Journal last year from the MIT, basically the Alumni Association. MIT, Massachusetts, is an engineering school. They train engineers. They train them in engineering, and they train them in a certain leadership style. MIT graduates have started, so let's call this the MIT Corporation. MIT graduates have started 30,200 businesses with 4.6 million employees and $1.9 trillion in annual revenue as of 2018. The annual revenues of the MIT Corporation lagged Russia, but were ahead of India. Okay, so that's a powerful group. And so what is the MIT leadership? Well, because it's part of their culture. It's problem-focused, technically competent, data-driven, collaborative, apolitical, and they avoid the trappings of leadership. The corner office, the private jet, the limo service. These guys will put their desk out in the middle of the work group and work with the troops. And so there it is. I mean, that's the model. And well-known examples in everyday life would be, I'll give you, 4 here. Sergio Marchionne, he was an Italian engineer from Canada who was running an insurance company. Fiat, the Italian car maker, was failing. They hired Marchionne. He came in, took over as CEO, and he saved Fiat. He fixed it. It took him about 18 months. He fixed it. And then Fiat bought Chrysler, and he fixed. Chrysler was gone. It was living on the government welfare. He fixed Chrysler. He fixed Fiat. He fixed Chrysler, and then he tried to buy General Motors. He died last year. He worked himself to death. He slept in his office at night. Sometimes he slept on the plane, dressed in a sweater. It was completely just humble, low-keyed, but intense and fiercely competitive. Hubert Joly was a French guy who took over a huge American chain of electronics toys called Best Buy. It was failing. It was almost gone. He took it over. He turned it around in about 18 months. He retired about a year ago, and they're starting to, Chrysler started to go because Marchionne's gone. Joly retired about 12. Humble, quiet, understated, apolitical, and intensely competitive, and fixed Best Buy. The last guy is Alan Mulally, maybe the most spectacular of the three. He's an engineer from Kansas. He was at Boeing. He was the number 2 guy at Boeing, the aircraft manufacturer. They didn't promote him to CEO, so he left and he went to Ford. Ford Motor Company the automobile man, was dying. They were absolutely dying. They were trembling on the edge of bankruptcy. He came in, turned them around. He took over in about 18 months, turned them into the best performing automobile manufacturer on earth. He retired about 6 years ago, and they've now slipped back into trouble because he's not. Go to YouTube and look up Alan Mulally at Stanford Business School, and you'll see an example of this. He's really, you can see he's quite modest, but he's got a real presence. And you just watch this guy talking, and you say, I would love to work for that guy. He's just got it. Okay, you all with me? So what I'm saying is here are some real examples of humble leadership being highly effective. So, you remember I said in 2002, reading, there was no consensus in the literature regarding the characteristics of effective leadership. I can tell you now, after all this time, it's been almost 20 years, right, that what effective leaders look like. They have these 6 characteristics. And kind of in this order, the first thing, if you're in charge, the first thing the staff want to know is, can they trust you? Integrity is about keeping your word, playing it straight, not playing favorites, not double dealing, living up to your commitments, fulfilling your promises, integrity. So, and that integrity creates trust. And if you want to evaluate team performance and you can't get performance of the actual team, the degree to which the staff trusts their leader is a proxy for team performance. It's the best single predictor you have for the performance of a team, the degree to which staff trusts it. So, so integrity is absolutely essential for leadership, and my example here would be Bill Clinton, who is a notorious liar, who's having an affair with an underage girl in the White House. His wife heard about it. She challenged him. She said, "Are you doing it?" He said, "No." She went public and defended him, and then it turns out that it was true. So she and this is in her biography. She confronts him and she says, "Why did you lie to me?" And he said, "Honey, you know I've always been a liar. If you're going to lie to your wife, who are you not going to lie to? You're going to lie to everybody and anybody." The line around the White House was, "Bill thinks he can talk his way out of anything because he's a liar." And so he was not a leader. He was just a lying politician. And no one in the White House was loyal to him. They're just there because it was good for their careers. You follow me? So first things, can you be trusted? Second, do you know what you're talking about? Competence. Now, this is going to make the MBA people mad, but the issue here, so competence. If you're in charge, people are going to be coming to you all day long wanting to know with questions. How do I do this? Right? You know, how do you do this? How do you do that? And if you don't know what you're talking about, you can't help them. And if you can't help them, they'll think you're an empty suit. They'll think you're incompetent. And what's the example here? It's MBAs. And this isn't my idea. This is other people's ideas. The notion behind the MBA degree is there's a body of formal knowledge regarding business. And if you master that body of formal knowledge, you're then ready to run any business. So you don't have to know what's going on at the level of the workforce because there are these abstract principles that govern businesses. And that's what happens. They show up and they don't know what they're talking about. I remember when I'm a retired naval officer. When I first was commissioned and reported aboard ship, I went to my senior petty officer and I said, "What do you want from me?" And he said, "Stay out of my way because you don't know what you're doing." And I said, "Okay, I agree." The third thing that people want to see, so can you be trusted? Do you know what you're talking about? And the third thing is, do you make good decisions? And the thing about good decisions is you can't ever make good decisions. 50% of all decisions in business are wrong. Good decision making means you can recognize when you made a bad decision and you can fix it. So that's what good judgment is. And what do narcissists do? They never make a mistake, right? So they can't fix their bad decision. Anyway, and so my example here is the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War. Something like 6,000 junior officers were killed by their own troops because the troops thought the officers were going to get them killed because they had bad judgment. So you're walking through the jungle at night, boom, oh, he stepped on a landmine. Too bad about that. So when the troops have an opportunity to save themselves, they will. So can you be trusted? Do you know what you're talking about? Do you make good decisions? And then otherwise you'll get us killed, right? So, and you see a lot of really great decision-making coming out of Washington these days. And then the vision. Can you explain to the staff why you're doing this? Why does this make any sense? Why is this worth proceeding? That's the vision thing. Can you say? Can you explain it? And then we get to the modern, very modern. I mean, as the last couple of years research, humility. The absence of self-regard and so forth, and then being ambitious, competitive, driven, and wanting to win. And that's it. Now, virtually no one matches that pattern, and everybody has their issues, but that's the ideal leader, the pink-haired man. So we can, this is how we, in our work, define charisma. This is our dark side measure. Those four scales, bold, mischievous, colorful, and imaginative, together, aggregate scores on those define charisma. In other language, in the language of psychiatry, bold is narcissism, mischievous is psychopathy, colorful is histrionic tendencies, and imaginative is schizotypal tendencies, just for what it's worth, but we relabel them. Okay, so bold, socially poised, arrogant, entitled, that would be Donald Trump.
Thank you. Hi. Don't you think that, like with industries and things transforming so well, imaginative is kind of very strongly correlated with vision? Because these days I'm in retail and I'm a CEO. Huh?
And with strategic thinking. Imaginative goes with strategic thinking. You know,
yeah, but this, I mean, yeah.
Yes.
It looks like it's bad. Because it says here that it's usually maybe in the charisma clutter.
Yes.
It looks like it's like impractical, but don't you think that these changes, or it's more tolerated in some industries and in some times? I am an imaginative, and I suffered when I saw that as a bad thing.
You know, I think some imaginative is important for every business. I mean, banking, finance. You got to. It's the finding the new paths. It's the creativity part. No, I mean, that's my highest score. So yeah, so I'm a fan of imaginative. But you need someone around to say that idea is crazy, and you have to listen when they say that idea is crazy. It's okay to have crazy ideas. It's just some are crazier than others.
Have another question there, and
hello. As you already presented, when they want to hire, I don't know, on high position roles to lead the company. And my question to you is, how would you tackle this issue of charisma being not so good and effective for the company when you are talking with the top management?
Well, first of all, I did not make this clear in the talk. Humble people can also be charismatic. So hello. Humble people can also be charismatic. So look at Alan Mulally and that. I try YouTube and the clip with Alan Mulally at Stanford Business School. You'll see he's got it. He's got charisma as well as being obviously humble. But on the other hand, when we're dealing with these really talented people who are humble, we often tell them you actually have to do more self-promotion. You have to. They don't find it comfortable, but they have to. So the answer to your question is, some humble people are in fact charismatic, but you need to educate the board too that charisma can lead you and get you in big trouble in a hurry. It dominates the conversation, but it's only a small part of the package. What you really want is look at their track record. How well did they do in their last job? What did their staff think about them? What kind of performance did they demonstrate where they were? Not just how well can they talk about themselves.
That's a challenge. Thank you.
How do you know what their staff used to? I mean, as a board. How can you actually? How can you measure what their staff? Because usually, this is not a public thing, and it's difficult. Yeah, I mean, you can call their former board members or whatever because you're friends with them, but with the staff.
The best way to evaluate any leader is to ask their subordinates. Subordinate approval is subordinate ratings. Here's the manager. The bosses, they evaluate this guy in terms of how well he gets along with the boss. Here are their peers. The peers evaluate this guy in terms of their competitors with him. So the subordinates are the ones who actually know about the person's. They're the only ones who know about the person's real talent for leadership. Subordinate appraisals are everything.
Dr. Hogan, I'm curious. Yeah, up here.
Are you?
Hi. I'm curious if from 2002, when you said you started the studies on the incompetent management, especially in the States, has the rate of 65 up to 75 went down?
No, no.
So
No,
is there
it's-
still
no,
hope?
It just takes a long time to get the message out. And the people that are making hiring decisions in these organizations, they're so arrogant, they're so entitled, they're so narcissistic themselves. I really blame, one of the worst things about Donald Trump is this notion that he has about, well, a better example would be the Bush administration. This is the problem I think in the world today. It's the business about fake news, disregarding data, not paying attention to data. The most important thing in the world is data. Numbers are your friends. So in the Bush administration, the top guy in the Bush administration was a guy named Karl Rove. He was very smart. And this is recorded. He had an interview with a reporter from the New York Times, and Karl Rove said to the New York Times guy, "The problem with you people is you live in the reality-based universe. The problem with you is you live in the reality-based universe. We create reality." That's the problem. They won't pay attention to data.
Yeah, and just one more question. Is there any advice you can give, because you said the interview is very important and it shouldn't be superficial or look into the minority. Is there any advice, or I don't know, main advice that you can give to HR and to management when it comes to interviewing people?
What we always try to do, if we have the chance, is pre-screen the candidates with the assessments, put together a pool of qualified applicants, 3, 5, however many, and then let the board make the same dumb decisions they always do. But they can't make a mistake because every candidate is qualified. That you give them a pool of qualified candidates, and then they can play politics the way they always like to do.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Hogan, over here on the right side.
The other right.
Yeah. Hi. Hi. I was really puzzled by the difference between the job advertisements, between the need for charisma and need for humility, humbleness. So it got me wondering, to what extent is this a reflection of some other need that humans have to be beautifully lied to, or something else? You're a psychologist, so I'm wondering if there's any connection with something beneath it.
There's an old literature in social psychology that it's from group research. So you put people together in a group, strangers, they don't know, it's a group, you have 20 of them, and then you give them a problem to solve. And who will speak up first? The narcissist. And so you do this for like 3 or 4 days. In the first 4 hours of the first day, that narcissist will be seen as the leader of the group. But by the end of the first day and end of the second day, people say they'll stop talking to them because they know they're just bags of wind. So that first impression, so charisma works really well in first impressions, but it's deadly. I mean, people with repeated contact, people see through the facade. Do you understand? So charisma works extremely well in first impressions, but it doesn't last well. And that's a natural human tendency to be taken in by charisma initially. Everyone is.
Hi, I have one question, and I think it's a little bit more pragmatic in general. The first time that I put my eyes on the Hogan test and I made it on myself, it was kind of a shock for me. And I was speaking today with one of my colleagues that I was telling her that it was really a shock. And I am wondering, also after your speech and after hearing you, there are persons probably here that are thinking, okay, should I really sign up for this? Do I really want to see this? Am I really interested in seeing these parts of my personality in this moment? How can you make persons really being open to see the bad parts and the traits in their personality? How do you sell basically this?
I think careers are important, and having a good career is a big deal, but it's a performance. So how do you improve your tennis game? You go to see a tennis pro. The tennis pro has you hit some balls. Then the tennis pro says, okay, here's what you're doing wrong. You're not getting sideways to the ball. You're not keeping your eye on the ball. You're not taking the racket back soon enough. You're not following through correctly. You want to improve your golf game. I don't play golf. You want to improve your golf game. What do you do? You go see a golf pro. They have you hit some balls. And then they say, okay, here's what you're doing wrong. They always, and if you want to improve your athletic performance in any sport, you always focus on what you're doing wrong. There's no news in good news. The only news is in finding out what you're doing wrong. So you want to improve your career performance, you need to go to a career pro, and then they'll tell you, here's what you're doing wrong. You're not getting your racket back soon enough. You're not keeping your eye on the ball. You're not following through. You can't improve your game unless you know what you're doing wrong. So there's no news in good news. But you have to want to improve your game. Did that make any sense? Do you follow that? Yeah. I mean, I'm sure I'm right. I'm sure if you want to improve your tennis game, you have to fix what you're doing wrong. If you want to improve your bridge game, you have to fix what. If you want to improve your career game, you have to fix what you're doing wrong. And that's what we'll tell. There's no news in good news. There's just flattery in good news, or ego boosting. And it's only narcissists who need their egos boosted, right?
Any other questions? We have a very active CEO, Monica. Monica is a CEO, so she's different maybe from most of us.
Why is it digital disruption? I mean, why is leadership changing in digital disruption? I'm a CEO in digital company. That's why I came, actually.
Yeah.
Not to see you. I'm joking. Of course I came to see you. Why do you think it's changing in this digital environment, the leadership?
I don't think it's changing at all, but HR people think it's changing.
Okay, that's a good answer.
Actually, can I say a word more about that? So I gave a talk in Singapore a few months ago, and they wanted me to talk about digital leadership. So I spent some doing what I always do, which is research. I spent some time doing research on digital leadership, and what I just, there is this, organizations are increasingly becoming digitized, and you have to, and increasingly you become prisoners of the IT department. But blah, blah, blah. But the truth is that in these high-tech companies are very badly run. 90% of all these startups fail, and the reason they fail is because of bad management. So there's nothing magic about digital leadership. Steve Jobs was a really mean man. Jeff Bezos is a really mean man. Bill Gates is a hateful man. People work for these guys. I kind of have a theory that one of the reasons for the most part, there's more bad management in these digital firms than there is in real firms. And I think maybe it's because engineers don't really care that much about how they're treated. I think maybe that's, I don't know how to understand it other than that. They just tell me what you want, when do you want it, how am I going to get paid, how will I know when I'm done, and leave me alone. And I'll sit in my cubicle, in my steel case cubicle. Leadership is leadership. What varies is the team activity. But integrity, competence, judgment, vision, and humility always work. There was a question, I think. Yes.
How can we support our organization to change the game in the favor of humility, not the charisma?
Well, you just start a whispering campaign. Give the top management something to read. So read this. It's all politics all the time. See if you can persuade them to live in the reality-based universe. Pay attention to data. It's all about data. They make more money if they'll listen. It's not my game, it's their game.